What happens when the hunted becomes the hunter? Can one person's journey transform a culture of fear and prejudice? Imagine being the target of those who are supposed to protect you. What if the very same people who mocked you are now required to respect you? Meet Officer Marcus Johnson, a man who faced the dark side of law enforcement firsthand. Growing up in a neighborhood often plagued by crime, he dreamed of making a difference. But the very system he joined turned against him. In this video, we'll explore Marcus's gripping story, filled with challenges, determination, and an incredible twist of fate that brought him to the top. Why should you keep watching? Here's what you'll learn. Asterisk, how did Marcus go from being a victim of discrimination to becoming the chief of police? Asterisk, what events shaped his relentless pursuit of justice and equality? Asterisk, what hidden truths about police culture did he uncover on his journey? Asterisk, how did his experiences lead him to enact real change within the very department that once targeted him? These questions are not just for curiosity. They resonate with a larger narrative about resilience, empowerment, and the fight against systemic racism in law enforcement. Stay with us till the end, and you'll witness a transformation that not only alters one man's life, but has the potential to change an entire police department for the better. This isn't just a story about a man rising to power. It's about how one individual can challenge an unjust system and inspire others to do the same. So, are you ready to dive deep into the unexpected journey of Officer Marcus Johnson? Let's unravel the layers of this incredible story together. In the heart of a bustling city, where the sound of sirens often echoed through the streets, a young Marcus Johnson grew up surrounded by chaos and uncertainty. He lived in a neighborhood where crime seemed like a regular part of life. For Marcus, the streets were not just a playground. They were a battleground. Watching friends and neighbors fall victim to violence and injustice fueled his desire to create change. The only way he thought he could do this was by joining the police force. However, Marcus's dreams of making a difference soon collided with a harsh reality. As he began his training, he was filled with excitement and hope. He imagined himself standing up for the weak, protecting the innocent, and restoring peace to his community. But as he donned the blue uniform for the first time, that optimism began to fade. The camaraderie he expected was overshadowed by an unsettling culture that thrived within the department. In the locker room, jokes flew around like bullets, aimed at anyone who didn't fit the mold of the ideal officer. Marcus was often the target of these jokes. He was a black man in a predominantly white department, and the laughter at his expense echoed louder than the laughter of camaraderie. Colleagues who had promised to stand by him during tough times turned their backs, and the very people he trained with started to see him as a punchline rather than a partner. One fateful evening, during a routine roll call, the tension in the room escalated. A senior officer, notorious for his racist jokes, decided to make Marcus the centerpiece of his cruel humor. "Hey Marcus, do you need a map to find your way out of the hood?" he sneered, causing laughter to ripple through the room. The room filled with chuckles and snickers, but Marcus felt the weight of their mockery crushing him. Inside, his heart raced and anger boiled in his veins. How could the very people he worked with see him as a target instead of a teammate? As days turned into weeks, these humiliations became routine. The laughter that once echoed in his dreams now haunted him. Each day, he put on his uniform, hiding his pain behind a badge that felt heavier than ever. The streets he had longed to protect now felt more like a prison of prejudice. In those moments of isolation, he found solace in the thought of making it to the top, where he could change things from within. But what drove him deeper into despair was the realization that these actions were not isolated incidents. The culture of racism and discrimination ran deep within the department. There were whispers of promotions given based on skin color, and stories of officers turning a blind eye to misconduct that targeted minorities. The very system he had joined to fight against was the same one that sought to silence him. Then, one night, everything changed. A high-profile incident rocked the community. An officer-involved shooting that stirred outrage and ignited protests. The department was in turmoil, and Marcus, who had been working tirelessly to build trust with the community, suddenly found himself thrust into the spotlight. He stood on the front lines, facing the angry crowds, feeling the weight of their expectations and the pain of their distrust. In that moment, he realized he could no longer remain silent. The very people he wanted to protect were looking at him for leadership. Marcus understood that he had to rise above the torment and prove that he was not just a target. He was a force for change. As he faced the crowd, the chants grew louder, but so did his resolve. This was not just about him anymore. It was about the future of his community and the integrity of the police force. As Marcus stood there, heart pounding, he felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Could he be the change he had always wanted to see? Could he transform a department that had once mocked him into one that embraced diversity and inclusion? The questions raced through his mind, but he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a journey that would take him from the shadows of ridicule to the light of leadership. One cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city streets, Marcus Johnson found himself on patrol with his partner, Officer Rick Malone. Rick had always been friendly, but on this night, a tense atmosphere hung in the air. The city was restless, and the weight of recent events pressed heavily on both of them. As they cruised through the neighborhood, they received a call about a disturbance at a local bar. The bar was known for its rowdy patrons, and as they approached, Marcus felt a familiar knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. He had heard the stories, how his fellow officers would often joke about the people they encountered, treating them as mere fodder for entertainment rather than as human beings. Little did he know, tonight would turn into a nightmare. Upon arriving at the bar, they found a group of men arguing loudly outside. As Marcus stepped out of the patrol car, the night air felt electric. He could hear the laughter from inside, but it wasn't the kind that brought warmth. It was the sound of mockery, of derision. Suddenly, from the shadows, someone shouted, "Hey, look, it's the token cop. What's the matter, Marcus? Not enough melanin to handle this job." The jeers echoed through the air, and Marcus's heart sank. It wasn't just the bystanders who were taunting him. He could feel the eyes of his fellow officers watching, waiting to see how he would react. They were not there to support him. They were there to watch the show. Marcus clenched his fists, the frustration and humiliation boiling inside him. But he had learned to swallow his pride, to keep his head down and push through. That night, however, it felt different. As the situation escalated, Marcus and Rick tried to defuse the argument. Marcus stepped forward, attempting to establish control. "All right, fellas, let's calm down and talk about this," he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. But instead of compliance, he was met with more jeers. One of the men, emboldened by alcohol and the crowd's energy, pointed directly at Marcus and shouted, "What are you gonna do, huh? You're just here because they needed a black-faced to fill a quota." Laughter erupted around him, cutting through the night air like a knife. In that moment, the crowd's eyes were not on the incident at hand. They were on him, the black officer who had become the target of their ridicule. Rick stood by, visibly uncomfortable, but Marcus felt completely alone. The laughter from the crowd, mixed with the disdain from his colleagues, created a suffocating atmosphere. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to center himself, but the weight of their words pressed down harder. He had always known there was a gap between the badge he wore and the identity he carried, but tonight the chasm felt like an abyss. Suddenly, a scuffle broke out among the bar patrons, and chaos erupted. Marcus instinctively sprang into action, directing his attention away from the taunts and toward de-escalating the fight. But as he moved, he heard a voice behind him, loud and mocking. "Good luck with that, token cop. Let's see if you can even handle your own people." The laughter grew louder, drowning out his commands. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Marcus managed to separate the fighters and restore order, but the sting of humiliation lingered. As he looked back at the crowd, he saw not just faces, but a reflection of his struggles. The taunts didn't just come from the drunken patrons. They came from a system that saw him as less than human. After the incident, as they drove back to the station, Marcus was silent. Rick glanced over, sensing the turmoil within his partner. "You good?" he asked, but Marcus simply nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inside, he was raging against the injustice he had faced not just tonight, but since the day he had joined the force. Days turned into weeks, and that incident became a haunting memory. The taunts had carved a deep wound in Marcus's spirit. Each time he walked into the precinct, he felt the weight of their laughter follow him, an invisible reminder of his status among his peers. But instead of succumbing to despair, he chose to let that pain fuel his determination. He started to observe his colleagues more closely, noting their interactions with the community and the subtle and not so subtle ways prejudice steeped into their work. He realized that the same culture that had targeted him was also creating barriers between the police and the community they swore to protect. This incident, though painful, became a pivotal moment for Marcus. It pushed him to think critically about the systemic issues within the police force. The mocking laughter that echoed in his ears began to transform into a clarion call for change. He couldn't let their ignorance define him. He needed to rise above it. But the question loomed large. Could he really change the mindset of those who had once made him their target? As the months passed, Marcus Johnson found himself at a crossroads in his career. The memories of that night at the bar still haunted him, a constant reminder of the hostility he faced. But instead of retreating into silence, he embraced his pain and transformed it into motivation. He refused to be just another statistic, another victim of a biased system. He began to focus on proving his worth not only to himself, but to those who had doubted him. With each shift, Marcus worked diligently, often taking on more responsibilities than his fellow officers. He volunteered for community outreach programs, hoping to build trust with the neighborhoods that felt alienated from the police. Slowly but surely, he became known for his dedication. He would attend community meetings, listening to the concerns of residents who felt marginalized. His commitment was unwavering, even in the face of mockery from some colleagues who believed he was wasting his time. "Why do you care so much?" one officer scoffed during a break. "They're just going to hate you no matter what you do." But Marcus held his ground, knowing that each connection he made was a step toward changing the narrative. He often recalled the faces of the people he had encountered during those community meetings, the mothers worried for their children, the fathers eager to collaborate. Their stories fueled his resolve, and he knew he could be their voice within the department. Then came a pivotal moment that would test Marcus's strength. One evening, he received a call about a robbery in progress in a predominantly black neighborhood. When he arrived on the scene, he found chaos. Angry residents were shouting, accusing the police of being too aggressive. The distrust in their eyes was palpable, and for a moment, Marcus felt the weight of their pain echoing his own experiences. But instead of escalating the situation, he stepped forward. "Listen to me," he said, raising his hands to calm the crowd. "I know things haven't been easy between the police and your community, but I'm here to listen, not to fight. Let's work together to find a solution." His words were met with skepticism, but as he continued to engage with the residents, something remarkable happened. They began to share their frustrations, recounting their own encounters with law enforcement. In that moment, Marcus realized the power of empathy. It was a weapon against the prejudice that had tried to silence him. He took the time to understand their perspectives, promising to bring their concerns back to the department. By the end of the night, while some were still wary, a few residents approached him with gratitude. They saw him as a different kind of officer, one who genuinely cared. Despite the small victories, Marcus faced relentless obstacles. His peers were not always supportive of his initiatives. Rumors circulated about him being a community favorite, and the old jabs resurfaced, echoing in the hallways of the precinct. "You're just a puppet for them," one officer mocked during roll call. But each jab only fueled Marcus's determination. Then came a significant shift within the department. The chief of police announced an upcoming vacancy, and the buzz of potential candidates filled the air. This was the chance Marcus had been waiting for. He began to strategize, preparing himself for the possibility of applying for the chief's position. It wasn't just about him. It was about the community he wanted to serve. As the application process began, Marcus knew he had to stand out. He organized community forums to discuss policing strategies, inviting both officers and citizens to share their ideas. The turnout was overwhelming, and for the first time, residents felt like they had a say in their own safety. Marcus captured this momentum, documenting every story, every concern, and every solution that emerged from these discussions. With his application in hand, he presented a bold vision for the department, one that emphasized accountability, transparency, and community engagement. He wanted to be the chief who bridged the gap between police and the community, the officer who could transform a history of distrust into a future of collaboration. As he submitted his application, a mix of excitement and fear coursed through him. Would the department embrace change, or would they see him as a threat? The decision day arrived, and the tension was palpable. Officers whispered among themselves, speculating on the finalists. As the chief announced the candidates, Marcus felt his heart race. The room grew quiet as the chief began to speak. Today, we look toward the future of our department, a future that embraces diversity and unity. When Marcus's name was called as one of the finalists, a wave of disbelief washed over him. Could it be? Had he truly made it this far despite the odds? But with every step he took toward the podium, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was not just for him. This was for every person who had ever been marginalized, for every officer who had faced ridicule. As the final interviews approached, Marcus prepared himself mentally. He knew that this was not just a job. It was a chance to change lives. He was ready to challenge the status quo and confront the racism that had once targeted him. But with that challenge came a profound question. Would his fellow officers rally behind him, or would they see him as the enemy? As the news broke about Marcus Johnson's appointment as the new chief of police, a wave of reactions washed over the precinct. Some officers felt elated, believing this was a chance for change. Others were skeptical, clinging to the old ways. Marcus understood that to truly transform the department, he would need to navigate these contrasting attitudes carefully. He had to inspire those who believed in his vision, while addressing the fears of those who felt threatened by it. On his first day in office, Marcus gathered his leadership team for a meeting. The room was tense, filled with officers who had spent years in a system that often felt resistant to change. As he stepped to the front, he could sense the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "I know many of you have doubts," he began, looking around the room. "But we have an opportunity here to redefine what our department stands for." He shared his vision. A police force that worked alongside the community, prioritizing transparency and accountability. "We can't expect people to trust us if we don't listen to them," he emphasized. "Our goal is to serve, not to intimidate." Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Marcus knew that winning over the latter group would take time and effort. To kick off his new approach, Marcus initiated a series of town hall meetings in various neighborhoods. He wanted to hear directly from the people he served, to understand their concerns and aspirations. "This isn't about policing from above. It's about collaboration," he stated during a meeting. As he spoke, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The residents started to share their thoughts, and the atmosphere shifted from one of suspicion to cautious optimism. One woman stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen too many friends hurt by the police," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why should we believe that this time will be different?" The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Marcus felt the gravity of her pain, the echoes of past injustices resonating deeply within him. "I understand your skepticism," he replied softly. and I can't change the past. As these town halls continued, Marcus witnessed the power of community engagement firsthand. In one meeting, a young man spoke about how he had been stopped by the police multiple times for no reason. His voice quivered with frustration as he recounted each incident. Marcus listened intently, taking notes, determined to use these stories to inform his policies. "We need to do better," he said, his voice resolute. "I will implement training for our officers to ensure that we're treating everyone with respect and fairness." But not all meetings went smoothly. In some neighborhoods, the anger was palpable. People shouted accusations, demanding accountability for past wrongdoings. Marcus remained calm, recognizing that this was part of the healing process. He stood his ground, encouraging open dialogue, even when faced with hostility. "I'm here to listen, and I want to understand your experiences," he reiterated, hoping to show that he wasn't just another authority figure. Meanwhile, within the department, tensions remained high. Some officers felt Marcus was too focused on community relations, dismissing traditional policing methods. "We need to keep control," one officer argued during a staff meeting. "If we're too soft, crime will spike." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his role. "I understand your concerns," he said, trying to find common ground. "But by building trust in the community, we can create a safer environment for everyone. We can't police in isolation anymore." As the weeks went by, Marcus launched a new initiative called Community Ambassadors. The program enlisted officers to connect with residents, attending events, and getting to know their neighborhoods. The goal was simple: foster relationships that would lead to greater trust. Marcus felt it was essential for officers to step out from behind their badges and engage with the public on a personal level. At first, some officers were resistant to this idea. "Why should we waste our time?" one of them muttered during a break. "We've got real police work to do." But Marcus remained firm. "This is real police work," he countered. "Building relationships will help us do our jobs more effectively." To show the importance of this program, Marcus decided to lead by example. He began attending community events, such as local fairs and cultural celebrations. At one event, he met a group of children playing soccer in a park. They paused, looking up at the police chief in awe. "Can you play with us?" one boy asked shyly. Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "Absolutely," he exclaimed, joining in the game. Laughter erupted as he kicked the ball back and forth with the kids. This simple act, captured on social media, began to change perceptions. People started to see the police not just as enforcers of the law, but as members of the community. However, Marcus's efforts weren't without challenges. Some officers began to feel resentful, viewing his outreach as a distraction from their duties. They would roll their eyes when he would speak about community engagement during roll calls. Marcus sensed their frustration, but he remained focused on his mission. He knew he had to show them that this approach could make their jobs easier in the long run. Then came the day of a major incident that would test the very principles Marcus was trying to instill. A viral video surfaced showing a confrontation between several officers and a group of teens. The footage was alarming, and the backlash from the community was swift and severe. Social media erupted with calls for accountability, and the mayor demanded answers. In the face of public outcry, Marcus held a press conference. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders. "We must hold ourselves accountable for our actions," he stated firmly, addressing both the press and the community. "I am committed to investigating this incident thoroughly and ensuring that we learn from it." As he spoke, he could feel the tension in the room. He knew this was a pivotal moment for his leadership. Would his commitment to transparency and accountability resonate with the community, or would they view it as just another empty promise? In the following days, Marcus worked tirelessly to address the fallout. He met with community leaders, listened to their concerns, and assured them that he would not shy away from taking necessary actions. "This is about restoring trust," he told them. "We can't ignore our mistakes. We must confront them head-on." Inside the department, however, Some officers were less than pleased. "Why are we being put under a microscope?" One officer complained. "This isn't fair." Marcus understood their frustration, but he remained steadfast in his belief that accountability was essential for building a better department. He knew he was walking a fine line between maintaining morale within the ranks and addressing the community's demands. As the investigation unfolded, Marcus faced pressure from both sides. Officers wanted to protect their own, while the community demanded justice. He spent countless hours meeting with investigators, ensuring that the truth would come to light. "We owe it to the community to be honest," he told his team during a particularly heated meeting. "If we want their respect, we have to earn it." Then came the day of the announcement regarding the investigation's findings. The atmosphere in the precinct was thick with tension. Officers gathered in the conference room, murmurs filling the air. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing to deliver news that could change everything. "The investigation has concluded," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "We found that several officers acted outside of departmental protocols. Disciplinary action will be taken." Gasps filled the room. Some officers stared in disbelief, while others nodded in agreement, recognizing the need for accountability. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," Marcus continued. "We cannot turn a blind eye to our mistakes if we want to move forward." That moment marked a turning point for Marcus. It solidified his role as a leader who valued integrity over popularity. While some officers continued to resist his vision, others began to rally behind him, realizing that true change was possible. With renewed determination, Marcus rolled out training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and community engagement. He collaborated with experts to ensure that officers understood the importance of building relationships and handling situations with empathy. "This is about understanding our community," he emphasized during training sessions. "We're not just enforcers, we're partners in public safety." As months passed, the department started to feel different. Officers began to approach their work with a renewed sense of purpose. They participated in community events, forged connections, and started to see the benefits of building trust. Marcus watched as the culture within the department began to shift, albeit slowly. However, he knew that true transformation wouldn't happen overnight. There were still obstacles ahead, challenges that would test his resolve. But as he moved forward, he felt a sense of hope. He was committed to creating a department that stood as a beacon of change, a place where officers and community members could work hand in hand toward a safer future. In the midst of this journey, Marcus remained grounded in his belief that he was not just a chief but a leader who understood the weight of responsibility and the power of connection. He continued to challenge the status quo, pushing his officers to embrace the change he envisioned. As he looked ahead, Marcus knew that the road to true reform would be fraught with challenges, but armed with the support of a growing number of officers and the community, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey had only just begun, and he was determined to lead the charge toward a brighter future for all. As Marcus Johnson settled into his role as chief of police, he quickly realized that leading a department in the midst of significant change was no easy task. While many within the community welcomed his vision for reform, others in the department resisted. The air was thick with tension, and the battle lines were drawn. On one side stood Marcus, armed with hope and determination. On the other were the traditionalists, who clung to old ways, believing that the status quo was sufficient. It was a Monday morning when the first major challenge hit. A local newspaper published an op-ed piece critical of Marcus's approach, labeling him as soft on crime and suggesting that his focus on community engagement was a distraction from the department's primary mission. The article sparked outrage among some officers who felt their work was being undermined. "See, this is what I'm talking about," one veteran officer grumbled during roll call. "He's making us look weak." Marcus stood at the front of the room, listening to the murmurs of discontent. He could feel the walls closing in on him. "I understand that change can be uncomfortable," he started, trying to diffuse the situation. "But we need to ask ourselves, what does strong really mean?" He glanced around the room, gauging the reactions. Some officers nodded, while others crossed their arms, defiant. Later that day, he received an anonymous tip warning him about a faction within the department that was actively working against him. "They're planning to undermine your authority," the voice on the phone said, filled with urgency. "You need to be careful." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. The realization that he had enemies within his own ranks was disheartening. He knew that the road ahead was going to be treacherous, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. The following week, a significant event loomed on the horizon. A community safety forum where Marcus was scheduled to speak. He had invited community members to share their concerns and suggestions about policing in their neighborhoods. As the date approached, he sensed the mounting tension among some officers who were convinced that this was a stage for the community to air grievances against them. On the day of the forum, Marcus stood at the podium, the bright lights shining down on him. The auditorium was filled with community members, eager to express their views. As he glanced at the audience, he could see a mix of hopeful faces and skeptical ones. He took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for being here today. Your voices matter, and I am here to listen." After his opening remarks, he opened the floor for questions. A young woman stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "What are you doing to ensure that we feel safe?" she asked, her eyes fierce. "Too many of us have had bad experiences with the police." Marcus nodded, acknowledging her pain. "I understand, and that's why we're changing our approach. We want to build trust with the community, not fear." His words resonated with many, but there were pockets of discontent in the crowd. A man in the back shouted, "Trust? How can we trust you when you're not even holding your officers accountable?" That question hung in the air, and Marcus felt the weight of it. He realized that despite his efforts, the scars of the past were still fresh. "I promise you, we will hold ourselves accountable," he replied firmly. "If we want to change, we have to confront our mistakes, not hide from them." However, as the forum continued, it became clear that not everyone was on board. A group of officers had been dispatched to the event to represent the department, and their demeanor spoke volumes. Some stood with their arms crossed, faces hard, while others whispered among themselves, clearly dismissing Marcus's efforts. As the meeting progressed, a confrontation erupted. One of the officers, clearly frustrated, shouted, "You're ruining our reputation. We're here to enforce the law, not make friends." The audience gasped, and Marcus felt the tension rise to a boiling point. He stepped forward, determined to address the challenge head-on. "This is not about making friends," he said, his voice steady but passionate. "It's about earning respect. We can't just enforce the law. We need to understand the people we serve." The officer scoffed, rolling his eyes, but Marcus continued, "If we want people to respect us, we need to show them we care. This isn't just a job, it's our responsibility." The exchange left the audience in a state of unease. Marcus knew he had to regain their trust. "Let's open the floor for more questions," he urged, hoping to shift the focus back to the community's concerns. But the mood had shifted, and he could sense the doubt in the room. As the forum wrapped up, several community members approached Marcus, thanking him for his efforts. But he also noticed some officers slipping away, their disapproval palpable. That night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing support from his own team. The thought gnawed at him as he tried to get some sleep, but all he could think about was the divide growing between him and those who were supposed to stand by his side. The following week, things took a turn for the worse. A video surfaced online showing officers from his department engaging in questionable tactics during a routine traffic stop. The footage quickly went viral, igniting outrage within the community. Social media exploded with calls for accountability, demanding that Marcus take immediate action. Marcus called an emergency meeting, knowing the gravity of the situation. As he entered the room, he felt the tension in the air, thick and charged. Officers were visibly anxious, some exchanging worried glances. He addressed them, his heart racing. We need to discuss the video that has surfaced. This behavior is unacceptable, and we cannot ignore it. Voices rose in the room, a mix of anger and fear. It was just a routine stop. One officer defended, "You're going to throw us under the bus for one mistake." The room erupted into chaos as officers argued back and forth, some supporting Marcus's stance, while others felt threatened by the implications of accountability. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling like a referee in a chaotic match. "We are not here to point fingers," he said, trying to regain control. "But we cannot let this define us. We must take responsibility for our actions." He saw the expressions of disbelief on the faces of some officers, while others nodded in agreement. Later that week, the fallout continued. Community leaders called for Marcus to resign, claiming he couldn't handle the pressure of his position. "If he can't keep his officers in line, how can we trust him?" One activist stated during a press conference. Marcus watched from his office, his heart sinking as he felt the weight of the criticism bearing down on him. Yet amidst the chaos, he found unexpected support. A group of younger officers, inspired by his vision, stood up during a department meeting, expressing their commitment to change. "We want to work alongside the community," one officer said passionately. "We believe in what you're trying to do, Chief." Their words ignited a flicker of hope in Marcus. But the older generation of officers remained skeptical, and the tension escalated. Rumors began to spread that a faction was actively plotting against him. Whispers of discontent echoed in the break room, and some officers openly questioned his leadership. "He's too focused on making friends," one veteran officer scoffed to a colleague. "We need to get back to real policing." Marcus sensed the storm brewing and knew he needed to act decisively. He reached out to trusted allies in the community, asking for their support. They rallied behind him, amplifying his message of accountability and reform. Their voices added strength to his cause, helping to shift public perception. As he prepared for a press conference to address the video incident, Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew the stakes were high, and failure was not an option. The community was watching, and he needed to show them that he was committed to real change. "This is our moment to show integrity," he reminded himself. When the date arrived, he stepped up to the podium, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. "I am here to address the recent events that have caused a deep divide between our department and the community," he began, feeling the weight of every word. "What you saw in that video is not who we are. We are committed to accountability and transparency." His speech resonated with many, but not everyone was convinced. Questions poured in, challenging his authority and the effectiveness of his leadership. Marcus answered each one thoughtfully, knowing that every response was critical in shaping the narrative. "We will investigate this incident thoroughly," he assured them, "and those involved will face appropriate consequences." That night, as he returned home, Marcus felt drained but resolute. He had faced the storm head-on, but he knew it was far from over. The rift within the department persisted, and the fight for reform was only just beginning. He couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were still ahead. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus remained committed to bridging the gap between the police and the community. He initiated new training programs, focused on de-escalation tactics and cultural sensitivity. "Understanding our community is not optional. It's essential," he emphasized during one session. Yet within the department, the resistance was palpable. Some officers openly voiced their disdain for the new policies, feeling that they were being forced to change against their will. Marcus encountered more pushback than he had anticipated. "You're turning us into social workers," one officer said dismissively during a training session.